that button. Some of you should see it now. Strange.
Not working or something?
We're live, I think. I can see the we're supposed to be live now.
Yeah, I'll check the chat.
Anybody see this? No? Harrison said yes. So
Great, sounds like we're live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this town hall, the Huron Valley COVID-19 town hall. Thank you all for joining us. We also want to let folks know that if you need Spanish translation, that you can call in on another number. So I will turn it over to Di Bravo.
Hello, everyone. This is Di Bravo, and I will be your translator. Well, este es Ángel Bravo, y voy a ser tu intérprete. Quería pedirte que si nos estás escuchando en español, quieres oír en español el evento, voy a estar traduciendo al siguiente número. Quiero que escribas el siguiente número telefónico. Si lo pierdes, puedes ir a la página de Cosecha, Michigan, para encontrarlo hasta abajo en la descripción del evento. Entonces, marca el siguiente número: 512-402-2718. Y una vez que te conteste el operador, que es una máquina, quiero que ingreses el número 1629-763499, seguido del símbolo de gato. Una vez que ya tengas esto, vas a poder escuchar mi traducción de lo que estén diciendo los participantes en este teléfono. Y por favor, ponlo en mudo para que puedan escucharse mejor las traducciones. Gracias. Thank you, Des. I can pass it to you now.
Thank you. So I am Desirae Simmons. I am one of the co-directors with the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice, and I'm happy to have been invited to help moderate this town hall today. We are part of the Huron Valley Coalition, and we come together. There is quite a list of organizations who are part of the coalition. I'm just going to read some off for folks. We have the Ann Arbor Tenants Union, the Collective Against White Supremacy, Graduate Employees Organization, AFT Local 3550. We have the Huron Valley Democratic Socialists of America, Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice, Michigan Abolition and Prisoner Solidarity, Michigan Solidarity Bell Fund, Movimiento, Cosecha, and Arbor, No Rent Michigan, Peace House Ypsi, People's Police Watch, Poor People's Campaign of Washtenaw County, Resource Generation of Ann Arbor, the Rust Belt Abolition Radio, Science for the People, Student Workers Coalition at the University of Michigan, Students for a Humane COVID-19 Response, the Climate Action Movement at University of Michigan, Washtenaw General Defense Committee, Washtenaw Reds, We the People of Michigan, and Young Democratic Socialists of America at Eastern Michigan University. So as you can see, we are a broad coalition and continually growing. And so we came together around demands, a set of demands that around 5 main issue areas. So the 5 demands are centered around healthcare for all, housing for all, financial and material security for all, physical security and immediate care for vulnerable populations, and a robust public education campaign. You could see more information about our demands and the different subcategories for the demands at Huron Valley COVID-19.wixsite.com/demands. Then do I pause for DeBravo to translate?
I think that it's fine. I'll translate this. Por Laura, lo que hizo ahorita Des fue enumerar todos nuestros miembros de la coalición que están para trabajar sobre las diferentes demandas de nuestra coalición. Y voy a dejar que nuestros auditorio pueda visitar la página de la coalición que está escrita en la página de Cosecha, Michigan. En la descripción del evento, todos los grupos aunados a la coalición están enlistados en la página de Huron Valley COVID-19.wixsite.com/demandas, y voy a reducir el número de enumerarlas todos ellos. Visítenlos ahí, estamos todos ahí para que tengamos más tiempo y facilitar más tiempo a los speakers. Y también están enlistados como coanfitriones de este evento aquí en la página de Cosecha en Arbor. Probablemente los pueden todos ustedes ver dentro de la lista. Les puedo enumerar los que están de primero. Tenemos a Cosecha Michigan, tenemos la comunidad del Valle de Huron, del trabajo y de la comunidad en solidaridad, la campaña de la gente pobre en el condado de Washtenaw en Michigan. Tenemos los empleados graduados, la organización de empleados graduados número 3550, el movimiento Cosecha en Arbor. Tenemos el movimiento de cambio climático de la Universidad de Michigan. Tenemos la organización Nosotros la Gente de Michigan. Tenemos el IDSA, que es los jóvenes socialistas de la Universidad del Este de Michigan. Tenemos el capítulo o la organización de Ciencia de la Gente en Ann Arbor, y finalmente a los compañeros socialdemócratas de América del Valle de Huron. Así que los dejo para la intervención de la siguiente persona.
And also, if you have any questions that come up during the town hall, you can put them inside of the chat on the stream, and we will be monitoring them and gathering them to bring them back up and to ask questions at the end. So throughout, you can put your questions up and we'll try to get back to them at the end. So I think we're going to just go ahead and jump in. Throughout the time, I'll kind of just lay out a little bit for us as we kind of set the stage of where we are and why we are responding, which seems like we could understand that. But when we think about kind of some of the impacts of COVID-19 and this pandemic, we recognize that there's a lot of things that when thinking about numbers that we aren't covered, right? There's a lot of people who aren't counted within there. Some numbers would include people who are without housing. It might also include people who died before being able to get tested, so they might not be within accounts, and also thinking about other complications, and as we understand some of the different health disparities and how people are responding to some of the treatments even, that we recognize these numbers are not complete. But for here in Michigan, when looking at confirmed COVID cases, we're at 41,379 confirmed cases, 3,789 deaths. Here in Washtenaw County, we have 1,091 confirmed cases with 66 deaths. Here in Washtenaw County, we also recognize that the majority of those who are hospitalized are from the zip codes 48198, 48197, which is my zip code. And so that we also recognize that some parts of our community are heavily impacted on top of everything else. Also, when looking at unemployment numbers, so here in Michigan, Michigan has now paid $1.37 billion to 820,000 workers related to COVID-19. More than 1 million people have filed for unemployment since March 15th. And we also see that within the jail population that it has been going down very quickly. So we actually see that right now, currently the jail has a population of 143 people, but that includes 7 people who are in precautionary observation. So that would be new arrests. That includes 27 who are in observation because they had close contact with a suspected case. 2 people are currently quarantined, and 4 people are in medical isolation. They've also released 8 people who have been confirmed to have COVID-19. And so when we think about vulnerable populations in a vulnerable space, we could see that that is one area where we need to keep attention on. So I'm going to just go ahead and have us have each of our panelists introduce themselves. And if you could introduce yourself and talk about how COVID-19 has impacted you, that would be great. So I'm just going to start us off with, let's start off with Ann Jackson, who is a nurse, an RN with Michigan Nurses Association.
Hi, everybody. I am a nurse in ambulatory care at the University of Michigan. I am a proud member of the Michigan Nurses Association and have been for 36 years. I work in ambulatory care, and so I have not directly had to take care of COVID patients myself, but my clinic It deals with patients who use a lot of the drugs that are being sucked up by the pandemic. So many of my patients can't get the drugs that they need. I'm also a very active labor activist within my own union, but also I participate in a national nurses collective of labor nurses. And so I've been communicating very closely with the nurses in New York, especially the NYSNA nurses who are in the epicenter of this pandemic. And I have been communicating with some of the nurses from Chicago. Unfortunately, most of the hospitals in Wayne County are non-union. So we haven't had a lot of communication with them, but we have been reaching out to try and organize them. But the National Nurses Collective that I belong to organized a National Day of Action on Tax Day, April 15th. We threw that together in about 10 days. And that was a coalition of nurses from New York, Chicago, California, ourselves here in Michigan. And I believe there was also nurses in Florida involved. And what it was just pick an action to have to bring attention to the issues that we're having as nurses and healthcare workers. The main issue that we're having that most people hopefully are aware of already is the personal protective equipment that frontline workers everywhere are going to need. There isn't enough for nurses to use it the way we're supposed to use it, which is use it once, throw it away, leave the room, go back, get a new one. That's not what happens. It's very serious in New York. It's my understanding that they had a vigil today for the 25 nurses that the NYSNA union has lost to this pandemic. One of the interesting things about this pandemic is actually nobody's keeping track of how many healthcare workers have died. And that's, to me, criminal. The other demands that the National Coalition had, along with PPE, is that we needed a coordination instead of competition. There needs to be a federal directed way to get the supplies that everybody needs to protect us from the pandemic. But the most important thing that we wanted people to know is that the healthcare system in this country is broken, and we need a national healthcare system. We need national coordination to deal with the pandemic, and we need healthcare for everybody. Healthcare should not be tied to employment. With however million people are now unemployed and losing their healthcare as of today, that means that we have many people who are not covered, and we have a pandemic in our country. And that's one of nurses' main concerns, is that healthcare should be something that you have as a right, not as a privilege. So those were some of the things that we've been working on. We had our National Day of Action. The nurses in New York have continued to have actions. The nurses in Chicago are very concerned about the prison populations. Many of the prison populations have 50 to 75% positive COVID cases. And one of my nurse friends is at Cook County Hospital on the Cook County prison ward, where it's full of prisoners who've been contaminated with this pandemic, and that's just unacceptable. So those are just some of the things that we're working on and continuing to work on. I work closely with Labor Notes, who has helped us coordinate our national network, and was on a call today listening to Stacey Davis Gates and Sarah Nelson talking about how this is our moment. This is the time for all workers to band together, unionized or not, to demand that we don't work for the money. We don't have to sacrifice our lives for our jobs. This is insane. That it needs to be the safety for the workers first is what's most important, and healthcare for everybody. And this is the time to demand those kinds of things. That people should not have to give up their life for money for the capitalists. That's crazy. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for all of that and saying so clearly quite a few things. I want to just pull up a couple of things. One is thinking about, you said coordination, not competition. I feel like that sticks with me in so many spaces, that's something that we need to be working toward in general in so many different areas. And But that's actually quite a big driver of so much inequity that we see all the time, is that we're driven by competition instead of coordination and collaboration overall. And then also in terms of thinking about, kind of trying to change up this narrative about like heroes, like first responders, our healthcare workers as heroes, and not really recognizing that they're workers, right? And that they're people putting themselves at risk without protections, and that is unacceptable, right? We shouldn't, and I feel like we need to also kind of really push that and help people to see that, we all have rights in terms of our employment, right? And we have different certain expectations about what safety looks like, and that we don't get to put those aside, and we don't want hero status at that point. So thank you for that. All right, next up we have Payton with the Mutual Aid Network of Ypsilanti.
Hey, is my audio coming through clear? Radical, thank you. And thank you for that beautiful introduction as well. I think that Anne did an amazing job displaying the feeling behind a lot of why many of us are on this call tonight. I just want to really uplift that. My name is Payton. I use he and they pronouns. I'm a co-director of the Mutual Aid Network of Ypsilanti. Our acronym is the MANY. We believe in worker self-direction, people helping people, not because it's a nice thing to do, but because it is something that we have to do as an act of resistance against the forms of oppression that are hurting people, working class people, Black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, Indigenous people, queer people in this country every day. And so thinking about how it is that we actually build directly democratic processes, how it is that we include the people that we want to make decisions with at the table to make decisions by way of exchanging resources or finding ways to fight back in other creative ways. We've developed a series of programs to push resources into the community. We have a number of people who have been volunteering with us before the COVID-19 outbreak. We really don't want to turn into a COVID-19 response organization exclusively. We have a wider scope and dream for our participation in Ypsilanti than just COVID-19. And so we find it really beautiful that there are so many well springs popping up of mutual aid happening all over the world and in our own community. And we want to encourage those things, and also in conversations like the one that we're having tonight, talk a lot about why this is a long form process. I believe that I have 3 minutes, so I don't want to get too high on my horse here and get ahead of myself in this introduction. But I do want to say that when we're talking about our local here in this region, the term Huron is something that I really want to investigate. A lot of people are using Huron in their names, and I think it's something that we should all investigate. Once again, if we're thinking about long-term mutual aid, this isn't something that we're inventing right now, but Indigenous peoples before colonization were practicing it, and it was wiped out by settler colonialism. The French who conquered these lands called the Wyandot people the Huron because it was a derogatory term to say that they looked like boors and savages. So to adopt these terms as we're practicing what we call mutual aid is, I think, not coming from a place of history, and instead is continuing to work through these processes and forms of settler colonialism. Why are the riverways named the way that they are? Why is the land named the way that it is? We have to continue to push this narrative at the same time and know that what we're doing in this work is long form and has been an act of resistance since day one of colonialism. So I really want to express that as well and encourage people to continue to dig into history and to know that mutual aid isn't just a nice thing that's happening in response to COVID-19, but it has a long form resistance built in community aid of communal resistance and self-reliance. Communities all over the world are practicing this and have been for a very long time, and we can connect to larger coalitions and larger communities that are practicing this thing too. So the Mutual Aid Network of Ypsilanti is very interested in doing that sort of work.
Thank you so much for that, Payton, and for both lifting up like the importance of history in our work and recognizing, you know, kind of the places that we're coming from and recognizing history of place and the people of a place and how we come into that place as well. And also just focusing on some of the long-term work, right? So it's both the work that we're doing before COVID-19, during COVID-19, and after, and recognizing that, you know, a lot of times for us to connect where our future is, it's also connecting to our past places too. And so that this is deep work and it's long work and it's sometimes hard work, right? Where we're having to surface things that we might not have been thinking about in terms of how, as a way to move toward how we can be more in solidarity all the time. Great. So our next speaker is Özge Savaş with Beal's Tenants Union.
Hi, everyone. Thanks to Anne and Payton for all the important work that they've been doing. And as Payton mentioned, I also think it's really important to think about our work in the long term, even these responses even after the COVID-19 ends. My name is Özge. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a graduate student at the University of Michigan and a member of Graduate Employees Organization, GEO. I'm also currently involved with the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti Tenants Union and No Rent Michigan. I should say that at a personal level, as a response to the question, I did not experience loss of income or healthcare benefits as a result of the pandemic. So I feel very privileged and lucky for that. And that is also only because I'm a member of GEO, which fights really hard for the protection of healthcare benefits and job security for graduate workers, alongside racial justice and housing and climate justice issues. Apart from feeling privileged for being able to self-isolate while being paid, I think it needs to be acknowledged that those of us who are working professionals and students who have been experiencing a changing relationship to the domestic sphere, the inability to separate work life from the domestic life, trying to find a balance, the burnout from the Zoom calls, and the potential different ways that we've been experiencing the surveillance of our domestic lives and sphere. So these are some of the things that we need to be aware of moving forward. Even though we are the lucky ones to not have to be in the front lines and risk our lives while still being paid, it should be okay to say that we do not enjoy working from home if we do not enjoy it and if we feel the burnout. Because one potential dystopic scenario is after the pandemic, if the big companies and corporations decide that this has actually been more profitable for them, they could start forcing all kinds of surveillance tools and force us working from home. So it should not be okay to say that if we do not like this. Another issue I want to mention briefly in terms of the changing relationship to the domestic sphere is that I live in a low-income community in Ypsilanti, and what the community is experiencing has been affecting me indirectly through the mediation of my relationship to the building that I live in. All the problems that pre-existed, that correlated and are caused by poverty and racism have been exacerbated under COVID-19. So maybe those things have not directly personally affected me, but I've been hearing more fights outside of my building every day, people getting into arguments in the hallways of the building, and hearing increased domestic violence because the walls in this building are too thin. In my building, 1/3 of my neighbors have experienced, and the numbers are changing and increasing every day. They experience loss of income and loss of health benefits. In addition to that, the building I live in is eligible for Section 8, which means that we have a great deal of neighbors who have previously been homeless until finding shelter in this building after long waiting lines. So it means that even after these people find shelter here, their connection to the homeless community is continuing, and we've seen people sleeping in the hallways increasingly more and in the laundry room in our building after COVID-19. A couple times in a week, an ambulance is coming to our building and someone is being hospitalized. So I'm living in the same zip code that's mentioned earlier. So increased numbers of hospitalizations, definitely. And just an increased level of fragility and vulnerability in the community. So even though I myself wasn't experiencing the consequences, my relationship to the place that I live in has changed through others' experiences that I've been observing here.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it's important to, note that one, that we could be feeling what other people are feeling through this experience, that there's, we talk about different ways that people could be experiencing shared trauma in different ways because of what's happening. I know for me, just like looking at the ways that African Americans are being impacted has been weighing on me personally, even though I personally haven't lost a family member, but just like feeling that weight. And so I think like there's all this environmental mental health that we're gonna have to be keeping an eye out for in general. And the burnout that you talked about too, I think the point of thinking about how we need to always kind of keep our eyes on employers and things that might seem like, oh, this is what we want, but that actually it can be taken to an extreme that actually becomes unhealthy and exploitative, where then they could be surveilling us through these technology tools and or trying to push more productivity, where as opposed to other things that we might want for a more healthy balance. So I appreciate you lifting those things up for us. All right, and then our last speaker is Laura C. with Movimiento, Cosecha, and Arbor.
Ahí voy. I'm going to translate for Laura today.
Thank you, Paula.
Yeah. Laura, tienes que quitar, quita el mute.
Ok. Bueno, hola, buenas noches. Mi nombre es Laura y pertenezco a Movimiento Cosecha.
I am part of Movimiento Cosecha en Arbor, Ypsilanti.
Y pues para presentarme, mi semana estuvo muy pesada por lo de la caravana, pero todo salió bien.
I had a really busy week planning for this wonderful caravan. It was a success. We had over 70 cars show up.
Y tuve el meeting con mi hija de la escuela y después tuve que sacarla a jugar un rato y se me llegó el tiempo rapidísimo.
And then she had a meeting with her student teacher and for her daughter. And then she had to take her outside to get some fresh air, and she just got back, and it's been a very, very long day for her.
Bueno, ahora voy a decir cómo me siento, tengo que leerlo.
I'm going to tell you how I feel. I'm going to read it.
Lágrimas de mis ojos por cómo
I might cry, please understand.
es mi primera vez que estoy debatiendo en un grupo así, entonces estoy
This is my
nerviosa.
first time doing this, so I am a little bit nervous.
Ok.
Dale.
Bueno, como les dije, mi nombre es Laura. Llegué a este país de oportunidades hace 15 años.
I came to this country with working opportunities 15 years ago.
Desde mi llegada comencé a trabajar en un lugar de limpieza, en un hotel que se llama Weber's.
I began working at Weber's in the housekeeping department.
Con el pasar de los años logré tener mejores oportunidades en el área.
Throughout the years, I got opportunities to better myself at my job.
De un momento a otro llegué a mi trabajo y me dijeron, Laura, ya no hay más trabajo para ti.
15 years after, one day, I came to work and they said, you're fired.
Desgraciadamente, ahora con el COVID-19,
Unfortunately, now with COVID-19,
ya no tengo trabajo.
I have no job.
En ese momento, en mis memorias, empecé a divagar y dije, ¿qué va a pasar con los gastos?
At that time, my worries started filling up my brain with how am I going to pay for rent?
También pensé en que mis ahorros desaparecerían,
All
Yeah.
my savings are going to go away.
me quedaría endeudada.
I'm going to be in debt.
¿Cuánto tiempo podré sobrevivir con mis ahorros?
How long could I survive with my savings?
Mi esposo, que quedó como trabajador esencial,
My husband, who's an essential worker,
con tan solo 2 días de trabajo.
with only 2 days per week of work.
Mi hijo, que también trabajaba, quedó
My
sin
son,
empleo también.
my son also lost his job.
Es estudiante en la Universidad de Washington College.
He's at Washington Community College. He's a student there, but he's also working. He lost his job.
Y mi hija pequeña de tan solo 8 años
And my youngest daughter, who's only 8,
me pregunta ahora, mami, ¿cuándo se irá este virus?
asks, Mom, when is this virus going to go away?
Por otra parte, me siento discriminada por el gobierno
On the other side, I feel discriminated by the government
por no tener un estatus en este país.
because I have no status in this country.
Yo pago mis impuestos como cualquier ciudadano.
I pay my taxes like every citizen does.
Contribuyo al Estado de Michigan en todas las formas.
I contribute to Michigan with every single payment.
Ok, por eso decidí unirme a Movimiento Cosecha para luchar por mis derechos.
And that's why I am part of Movimiento Cosecha and Arbor Ypsilanti, to fight for my rights as a human being.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias.
Preguntas.
Do you have any questions?
Wow, we'll come back for questions later. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate you sharing so much and also joining us after what I've heard was a really successful event this afternoon. And also just for sharing your story, in terms of, the family losing employment, but, really like feeling that extra, when you said discrimination by the government, where you do support the governmental structure through your taxes, and that you are being shut out from receiving relief in this time where we need to be sharing the relief as opposed to picking and choosing. So thank you so much for sharing. We look forward to hearing more.
Por nada.
I translated over the phone, so we're good.
Wonderful. So now our next question for the group is about how you are organizing during COVID-19. Who would like to go first? Özge?
I could go, yeah. So our organizing as tenants, as Beal tenants, have begun before the COVID-19, luckily. But I'll share a little bit more of the personal story and kind of like tell you about like where I'm coming into this organization efforts in the building, and kind of like try to situate this Ann Arbor Ypsilanti situation in the current housing crisis that we're in. So I lived in Ann Arbor for 6 years before moving to Ypsilanti in the fall 8 months ago. And I had to move to Ypsilanti as a result of the housing crisis we are currently living in. So there was uncertainty if I will be able to, as a graduate student, if I will be able to find funding from the University of Michigan for another year by the time I had to renew my lease. And it was pretty early in the fall of 2018, even though we're talking about moving in the fall of 2019, as we know how the leases go in the area. So because of the uncertainty, I ended up not being able to renew my lease and losing the rental property that I lived in for 5 years. Then I was not able to afford anywhere else in Ann Arbor anymore. So I decided to move to Ypsilanti. And even though the place I found was not in good condition in Ypsilanti, it was a little bit more affordable than Ann Arbor. And I knew that I wouldn't be living here for longer than a year. But me moving here potentially meant that someone who previously lived here had to move somewhere else, which is a little bit more affordable than Ypsilanti. And this is what we call gentrification. And I say this because I know my rent is twice as much as that of my neighbors who lived here longer than me. And so there are landlords in the area in Michigan who are aware of all of this and taking advantage of these short-term leases. Here's the problem. Renters in Michigan are agreeing to very bad living conditions because it is hard to find affordable housing. And there are a great number of people who are homeless. So in this case, I see the housing crisis and the tenants' rights as inseparable issues. A couple people in my building started organizing back in December of 2019 as a result of the bad conditions in the building. We mainly had issues with maintenance, security, and sanitation in the building. And we started gathering in the laundry room every couple of weeks. When the pandemic happened, it helped to have those connections with our neighbors. So after the pandemic, we speeded up the canvassing with masks on or sometimes behind the closed doors with the neighbors in our building. We started collecting what kind of issues people have, how many people are unemployed, how many people are on Social Security benefits and things like that. We then connected with the other Beal buildings, Beal Properties owned buildings. We started having weekly Zoom meetings during the pandemic, drafted a collective letter to our landlord, asking for rent forgiveness for the unemployed and asking for the betterment of the conditions in our buildings. We are currently still discussing how and when to send this collective letter. So the eviction moratorium is buying us some time, which is good. I should also mention that we are plugged into the larger organizations and initiatives that are currently being formed in the area, like the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti Tenants Union and No Rent Michigan, which are also working currently for larger lobbying and advocacy about these issues.
Thank you. I think that one thing that I want to just lift up is that you talked about relationships and how important the relationships were that you had already started building actually before the, emergency, hit, and that how important that is for us to be just thinking about now, because we're in the midst of something, but not to forget about those relationships that we've been building, but then also to be thinking about, we need to be building these relationships now, because again, we know this isn't the end. We know this isn't the last time we're going to be in emergency response, even with the same thing, that there could be another wave too, right? And that we need to be building those relationships now. Thank you. Who would like to go next? How have you been organizing during COVID-19? If you just want to raise your hand, I can see your picture and I'll just. Okay, thank you, Anne.
So as I alluded to before, I belong to a national nurses network of nurses in labor unions. And we've been meeting prior to the pandemic. We've been meeting on the phone once a month with about 10 people from across the country. But as the pandemic started marching closer, we knew things were going to heat up for us. And so we increased the amount of calls that we were having, so that we were then having a weekly National Nurses Call. And it was then that we decided to come up with a National Nurses Day of Action, since we were having common issues with the lack of PPE. And so we came up with the National Nurses Day of Action and basically left it free for everybody, wherever they were, to do whatever they could to bring attention to the issues that we were having, hoping that it would solve some of the problems nationwide. And it definitely did bring a lot of attention to it. So here at the University of Michigan, I am in the University of Michigan Professional Nurses Council. I had tepid approval from my union president, so she didn't say no. So when you don't say no, I just go. And so myself and the other activists within my union organized a socially distanced protest on the 15th at shift change. We didn't have a ton of nurses show up because everybody's working really hard and they're tired, and I get it. And it's really hard to organize when you can't see people in person. But we had about 10 nurses on the sidewalk, socially distanced with signs. But then we also organized a huge labor coalition car caravan. So we probably had about 50 cars. Many of them were from the Detroit DSA, Huron Valley Area Labor Federation came, the Ann Arbor teachers came, we had some community members came, and our car caravan was just going up and down East Medical Center Drive for a half an hour, beeping their horns. They had signs all over their cars. It was great. And the other thing that was really awesome about the actions across the entire country is we got a lot of press coverage. And so I got a chance to talk to the Detroit News, the Detroit Free Press, the Michigan Daily, MLive, and we also had a TV news stringer there and ended up on 3 different news stations, being able to tell our story about how we are still in desperate need of PPE. We still have problems with the fact that the system is broken, that the for-profit healthcare system does not work for the American people, and the just-in-time supply chain is dangerous to everybody. And so it was nice to be able to get that much attention. Unfortunately, in the world of a pandemic, you may drop into the news cycle, but then something else happens and you drop right back out of the news cycle. So the nurses in New York and the nurses in Chicago have kept up the drumbeat of protests out on the sidewalks every week, talking about the fact that they don't have PPE, talking about the fact that we are losing healthcare workers. We're losing, aides and techs and nurses and doctors are all dying because we don't have the proper protection. And environmental services are important workers to us. The fact that everybody in the worker chain is important, and this pandemic shines a magnifying light on the fact that every worker is important, and without us all, the whole thing falls apart. So every action got a lot of press and it's brought a lot of attention. The New York nurses won the fact that they get a new mask every day when they were having to wear the same mask for 5 days in a row. So that was a win. The nurses at U of M have won the fact that they get to wear an N95 mask when the patient's on a ventilator instead of just during aerosolizing procedures. So that's a win. And every win is a step forward. So we keep trying, we keep organizing. Right now at the U of M, the thing that we're paying attention to and working towards is the fact that although it's a public hospital, they're very interested in their profits. They've been losing money. And so now we're looking at layoffs of not only, assistant personnel, but potentially nurses. And so how are we going to face that? The nurses are currently being asked to take voluntary furloughs, but after the furloughs comes the layoffs. So we'll see how that goes. Thanks for listening.
Oh, wow. Thanks for that. There's a lot going on in that space. And as you're talking about like small wins, right? And, a win to say you get a new mask each day in a relative sense is a big win, right? Just in terms of how much more increased safety that provides when we also know that we want even more. So let's see here. Laura, you want to go next? How have you been organizing?
Laura, ¿quieres seguir tú? Quita el...
Ok. Yo trabajo con una compañera que es Brenda, que también pertenece a Cosecha. Ella me invitó a unirme.
She works, she worked at Weber's with another friend whose name is Brenda, who invited her to be part of.
Entonces me invitó y yo le dije, oh, sí, un día de estos voy cuando tenga tiempo.
To be part of Cosecha. Okay, I got it. Yeah.
Entonces, un día ella quedó sorprendida porque llegué al lugar donde se reúnen y dijo, ¿de verdad veniste? Le dije, sí, porque mi esposo necesita una licencia.
One day, Brenda was very happy to see her at one of the Cosecha meetings. And she said, wow, you made it. And she said, yes, I am here because my husband needs a driving license.
Dice, ¿tú no manejas? Le digo, no, yo si no tengo una licencia no voy a manejar nunca aquí en los Estados Unidos.
So Brenda said to her, wait, you don't drive? And she said, no, without a license, I'm never going to drive in this country.
¿Por qué? Si todos manejamos sin licencia. Y le digo, porque yo sufro de nervios y si una policía está detrás de mí, choco con todos los carros.
And Brenda asked her, why don't you drive? We all do it. I mean, we unfortunately don't have any license. She said, I can't. I suffer from anxiety. And if I see a police car, I'm sure I'm going to have an accident.
Entonces me uní el verano pasado a Cosecha y de ahí aprendí y he estado aprendiendo cómo es el movimiento y que ahora estamos luchando por las licencias, pero en realidad lo que viene, queremos dignidad, respeto y estatus permanente para los 1000, porque no solo soy yo, somos muchos.
Millones.
Y este movimiento.
So she joined Cosecha, Movimiento Cosecha in Arbor, Ypsilanti last summer, and she's been learning a lot about the movement, and especially because it is for license for all, but she realizes that is now, especially with COVID, that is not only licenses for all, it is dignity and respect for every human being.
También tuve una marcha. Mi primera marcha también fue en el verano pasado, en donde estuve muy nerviosa.
She was at the first march for dignity and human rights and licenses for all last summer as well, which because of her anxiety, she was very nervous about.
Pero fui y me sentí muy orgullosa de todos, de todos los latinos que estamos luchando por lo mismo, por el mismo objetivo. Y vi que llegó bastante gente, me emocionó mucho. Esto me hizo seguir en el movimiento.
After the march, I felt so proud to see so many people from my community show up. It was not only people from my community, were very different people who wanted to march to help us to get our rights. And this makes me fight and be part of this group and show up every time.
Entonces, sigo ahí y no voy a despegar no voy a estar contenta hasta que logremos que nos respeten, que nos cuenten, porque yo al igual que todos los ciudadanos pago mis taxas. Entonces es hora de serme visible.
I am done being invisible. I am still being in this part of this movement, and I'm going to stay because I pay taxes as everybody else does, and I deserve to be treated as a human being too.
Y este movimiento me ha hecho aún más fuerte para seguir en la lucha. Y le doy gracias a Cosecha por estar ahora en mi presente.
This movement has made me so strong. I am very thankful to Movimiento Cosecha and Arbor Ypsilanti for the support, for teaching me to feel strong about who I am.
Y hasta el día de hoy en la caravana sigo adelante y seguiré adelante.
And we'll keep going. Even today with this caravan, with everybody who showed up, I'm moving forward and we'll keep going.
Por todos.
For everybody.
Cosecha hasta la huelga.
Hasta la huelga.
Gracias.
Thanks for that. Yes, thank you. I love that kind of that energy of like how we build up and it swells into this space and it helps us to push forward even in these hard times. So thank you for sharing that. Before we have Payton share, I just want to remind everyone again that if you have any questions or comments or things that you want the panelists to answer, this is a good time for you to post those on into the comments because we'll be coming to your questions after Payton goes. Payton, so how have you been organizing during COVID-19?
Thanks, Des. And thank you to everybody else who has spoken as well. It's hard, I think, to organize right now with everything being so virtual. I know Özge had talked about the fact that, there's this particular type of burnout that happens when we're doing all of these virtual calls. I was on one 10 minutes before getting on this one. And so it's just, it's very interesting to see so many different people coming together. I was fortunate enough to be at the caravan today. And so to be able to hear that energy and to have been able to see it in person meant something. And to be here on this call right now is really humbling, to be able to hear all of your experiences and to know that that's a part of this larger movement. So I just want to thank everybody who's spoken so far and all of the movements that you're connected to. The Mutual Aid Network of Ypsilanti, we started last year, about a month and 5 months ago, as a nonprofit organization. Many of us who decided to go that route had been doing organizing in the community for some time. Some of us were doing farm labor solidarity. Some were doing labor organizing. Others of us were doing direct action and protest training. We were doing support for people who were incarcerated. There was a lot of different things that were happening. And all of the while, we were taking notes of the fact that all of our personal vehicles, bank accounts, and resources were being used in our activism. And we needed some sort of a tool that was community owned and operated to be able to protect us and give us some sort of a collective foothold to save ourselves from putting ourselves at further risk and burnout as activists, to create something sustainable that could last the long term. So we developed the Mutual Aid Network of Ypsilanti as a worker self-directed nonprofit. We believe that the worker self-directed model is one that can be applied not only in nonprofits, but should be applied in all fields of labor. That anyone who is participating in labor should be able to participate in the decision-making to control that labor. And I think that, as Anne was saying, in the essentialization, as we understand that all workers are essential, all of us are contributing to society. I think at the same time, as more people are recognizing that, more people are recognizing the need for workplace democracy. We don't live in a democracy in this country. If we did, we would have democracy in the workplace, we would have democracy in our neighborhoods. And so the Mutual Aid Network of Ypsilanti was devised to try to propel those conversations, to give people the platform to start to talk about how it is that we can democratize our relationships in these really creative and collaborative ways, with the backing of a tool that we can use collectively. So myself and 4 other people operate as co-directors of this nonprofit. We actually don't have a sitting president or CEO or vice president. We vote those positions in to sign paperwork off as needed. We don't have people who are in positions of hierarchy. Instead, we operate in what's called a horizontal fashion. So we built this framework out, and it was ready to handle COVID-19 because we had 3 programs that we had built out that are still in the works. Nothing that we've developed has been set in stone. Everything has been adapting through this crisis. One program that we had came out of relationships that we had been building with 2 single mothers at a Black church that was down the street from where some of us lived. Beautiful Gate International Church does a pantry every Saturday at noon to 2 o'clock. I highly recommend anyone who's looking for resources come, or tell people that they know to come. We serve over 300 people a week. And we had been able to build up to that capacity over time, even adding on doing home deliveries to people because we knew that the need was there. and our pantry support program has been able to amplify the work that's been going on the ground, and follow the lead of the women who are doing that work. We also have our Pass It On program, which exists to find not only consumable, but also like homewares, kitchenwares, supplies from grocery stores that would get thrown away. There's a lot of stuff that gets thrown away by the retail industrial complex every day, and it's stuff that working class people could use. We see it all end up in dumpsters, backpacks get slashed, food gets bleached, and homewares get spray painted or smashed. And so knowing that these goods could go into the community, we try to put pressure on local sellers, big box stores and small, to donate those goods and push them into the community through our food pantries that we operate with. In our network, we have tight relationships with the Ypsilanti Peace House, which is a Catholic worker house of hospitality. Other houses of hospitality like Mercy House and Purple House, as well as the Ypsilanti Gathering Space, which is a autonomous Center for Hospitality that's been working for about 3 or 4 years in this area. And so with all of the work that people have been doing for a long time, we were able to build on those relationships and create this thing that's able to bring new supplies into the community and give them to people that we know need them. Our third program that we have is the Arts, Culture, and Benevolence program. This one is very experimental. The acronym is ACAB. For everyone who's listening who understands what that acronym is, it also translates to all cops are bad. I'm going to tone police myself there for a second. I don't want to swear on this call, but understanding that the police and prisons don't make our community safer, that in the Arts, Culture, and Benevolence program, what we offer is at home or otherwise remote volunteer services. So if people are having to do community service from the court because they got arrested or got fined, and are on probation, or have otherwise some sort of a civil service that they owe the state, we can give people the opportunity to read, watch, or listen to multimedia, and then produce report backs on those things by way of writing or doing an interview, making an audio presentation, creating their own film, dancing, creating art, doing something that expresses what they read, watch, or listen to in reflection, to add to the community conversation about liberation, collectivity, how it is that we become more sustainable. All of the media that we're selecting is along those lines, trying to show people that there's another way of taking care of each other. And we do this because people who are being affected by the carceral system are already suffering under the buckling weight of patriarchy, white supremacy, and capitalism. So we know that working class people who are having to go out and do volunteer service have to sacrifice their home lives or sacrifice their time away from work. So we want to offer that as an option for people to be able to do things while they're commuting or do things while they're at home that benefit the community in this very real way by adding culture and arts. So we have these 3 programs that we've been experimenting with. Some have been able to blossom through COVID-19, like the pantry support and the Pass It On program, and others are still trying to find their way, like the ACAB program, really trying to find our community there and make sure that we're doing this in a dignified way. Instead of having a bunch of principles, we have our ways of being, which are as simple as don't speak in the language of promises, or make decisions that affect other people with those people. So we have our ways of being that we want to come into spaces that are founded on this directly democratic, horizontal rather than top-down style of approach to organizing. We really think that this is the default for mutual aid, that if you're interested in doing mutual aid work, it isn't just something that you're doing nice on behalf of somebody else, but you're doing this activity with someone else. This is a mutual process, right? You don't do mutual aid for someone else. You work with people. And so understanding that this isn't like a tit for tat sort of exchange, and that we're building long-term power that's based on people helping people because we're fighting together to overcome these systems and build new systems in their place. That's what we've been really thinking about. And so with COVID-19, we've been stressed because at the point that we are supposed to have these bigger in-person meetings to invite people to help to flesh out this program, to become co-directors, reaching out to find new people to help us guide this movement, COVID-19 hit. And so we've been doing a lot of virtual calls, but we have been doing a lot of in-person work. Just today, we had a large donation from Big Lots that was sent to a warehouse that we've been renting. And those supplies are going to be given out into the community. So we're still operating in person, although it is very hard to coordinate through Slack and through Zoom and all of these other forms of virtual interaction. So that's been very difficult, but at the same time, we're making space to love on each other and to be real and to think about the long-term vision. I don't want to die in a world where there are food pantries. I want to die in a world in which people have the power to be able to feed each other on their own volition. I don't want to have to rely on international aid organizations. I don't want to have to rely on local nonprofits like food gatherers to feed my community. Instead, I would like my community to be able to be strong enough and democratic enough to be able to overcome these hurdles and challenges together to set the precedent for what it is that we know we need to step into. And so when I see organizing like that of Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez in New York, she has a very sort of cult of personality style of organizing where everyone who's doing the mutual aid around her is wearing her name on their shirts. I think that this detracts from the major point. Instead, what we're trying to do here in Ypsilanti is build a movement that doesn't rely on leaders. It relies on the base of the community itself to make decisions and to create power. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do here, is reset that narrative that mutual aid is coming from a long pathway of anti-colonialism, anti-capitalism, and anti-patriarchy. We have to fight back against these systems as we're caring for each other in these really real ways. And that means doing the hard work of having hard conversations about how emotionally we're processing this as well. And that's been a large part of this as well. Our conversations oftentimes talk about burnout. What does it mean to build capacity? How do we avoid adopting the practices of charity and pity upon other people and instead build solidarity? So that's a lot of how we've been affected by COVID-19. It's been forcing us to reconsider how we do on the ground organizing for the long term. But I do think that we're stepping up to the challenge slowly and working at the speed of trust.
Thanks for that. You know, it's such an interesting conversation that I've been hearing, just in terms of, you know, both people being so thankful and recognizing all the power of the mutual aid happening and how the community is rising up in support of one another. And also this anger, this feeling that this is what the government is for. This is why we pay taxes. So here's where we expect something and it's not happening. So how do we kind of push against this tension so that we both recognize the power of the community rising up, and we also don't fall into the trap that some would say of like, oh, well, you see, this is why we don't have to provide services and we don't have to provide funding, because the people will do it themselves, right? And how we can get trapped in that kind of place too. So maybe we'll kind of tease that out a little bit more. I'm just looking at some of the questions that are coming in. And so let's see here, which one might be the easiest segue. But one is that we've seen the government intervene in some ways to offer things that were previously thought to be impossible. So things like eviction protection, expanded unemployment benefits, things of that sort. How can we continue to expand these benefits to include more people? And this in some ways goes to some of the points that Lara was bringing up earlier in terms of undocumented people not having access to some of the relief that is being provided. So if anybody wants to talk about that for a couple of minutes. So again, that was thinking about, you know, what can we see as possible and how do we continue to expand that?
I think that that's an amazing question. And something that comes to my mind immediately is how I'm reading these articles about how governors across this country are having to literally smuggle protective gear and test kits under fear that the federal government is going to take them. Thinking about how governors are employing police, private military, and National Guardsmen to protect these goods from the federal government is something that we need to be considering in how the federal government is responding to this crisis. I've also seen a number of legislations being proposed across the country about taking away the rights of the LGBTQ community and immigrants. And so thinking about our reliance upon the federal government, I think that we have to really, really take heavy consideration as to who it is that we're asking for to justify our humanity. Now, when we're talking about universal basic income or access to healthcare, right now, of course, people default to thinking that the federal government is the only one who's able to bestow that power upon us. But if we look at our fighting comrades in northern Syria, they've been able to build in their communes in Rojava, this territory in northern Syria, the southern border of Turkey, medical autonomy in some of their communes by working together and not centralizing power into the medical industrial complex, but taking back their ability to care for one another in these really real ways that take both indigenous wisdom and contemporary medical medicine and technology to care for the communities. Of course, this is a bigger question, how it is that we come to sovereignty as opposed to reliance upon a federal government. So I think it's a both. I think we have to fight for our rights under the Constitution and under the conditions that we're subjected to legally in this country and capitalistically. We can take what we can, and at the same time, the most important thing is build for the future in a way that we don't have to rely on the federal government, who we know is stealing from us every single day and taking supplies that are essential from states and centralizing them in these large groups like FEMA away from communities that need them right now.
Thank you. Anyone else want to talk about how we can expand the benefits that we're seeing that are becoming possible to others, to include more people? And or I would say, in addition to that, thinking about how we expand these benefits to be permanent, right? That they don't just go away, whenever the state of emergency ends, but how do we push for things to be more permanent? And I saw you raise up.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm thinking of is I would like to see us expand to a national healthcare system, because that's the one thing that they haven't stepped towards. Currently, we suffer with the insurance companies and the drug companies and the pharmacy benefit managers deciding about healthcare for most of the nation. For people who do have insurance and for people who don't have insurance, it's just unaffordable. And so I would like to see that the government make a nationalized healthcare service and a national healthcare plan so that everybody from 0 to 100 and however many is covered under that care. Because if we had that, not only would that help for the care of our citizens and be able to move us away from an illness-based healthcare system to a health-based and preventive care health system, but it also would give us the coordination to deal with a pandemic or to deal with a health emergency like this and have a coordinated service across the entire United States that would be able to surge what we need to where we need it, when we need it, instead of the discombobulated competition system that we've got going on right now.
Thank you. Paula, I put a question in the box, if you could ask that. We'll come back to you again, Özge, for the next.
Laura, hay una pregunta que dice, pero está en español. The one in Spanish, you mean?
Yes.
Ahí está en español. Si quieres te la leo, ya la leíste, Laura. Dice que ¿qué vamos a hacer después de la caravana? ¿Qué planean Arbor, Ypsilanti, el movimiento Cosecha en Arbor, Ypsilanti hacer después de hoy? ¿Cuáles son las prioridades principales?
Después de hoy, nuestras prioridades principales siguen siendo las licencias.
Espérate un minuto, voy a traducir esa pregunta. So the question, I don't know if it was written in English, but I'm just going to read it. The question is, what is Movimiento Cosecha and Arbor Ypsilanti planning to do moving forward, especially after this caravan today? So Laura is going to answer that. But she started saying that obviously to keep reinforcing licenses for all.
Y después de eso, seguiremos trabajando porque queremos papeles.
And we'll keep working to become documented. That's what we all want.
Eso es lo que queremos.
That's what we are fighting for. And
No,
dignity and respect, obviously.
No somos uno, no somos dos, somos millones.
We're not one. We're not just the two of us or the three of us.
No
We are
solo-
millions, over 11 million,
No solo yo.
not just her.
Y seguiremos trabajando. Así que Cosecha va a crecer más y seguirán escuchando de nosotros.
Yeah, we have gotten many members to join and we keep getting more and more members. This is going to be big and we're all of you who want, just join, please join so we can make a difference for so many people in this country.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. I'm gonna ask another question. Hopefully Özge wants to answer this one too, but if you can combine if you are interested in. But my question, this is a question also that was shared, is how do we connect immediate need for relief with systemic change? And I'm, I know just that within housing that this is a big question to be thinking about. So I pass it to you.
Sure, yeah. So I think it's really important to think about the local responses that we are developing today and like start having those conversations in our little local organizations or with just, connections we build with our neighbors or like whatever connection it is. It's important to start having those conversations with them for the longevity of whatever thing we are fighting for, including housing or other struggles. So like, for example, Ann Arbor Tenants Union was a thing in the 1970s until early 2000s, and then stopped being funded until now it's kind of like being revitalized or something. So it's important to think about how we can switch from the connections that we have today to long-term like institutional, structures or organizations, and kind of thinking about along the lines Payton was talking about earlier about how we can make these structures non-hierarchical. So it's important to think about these things for fighting for the injustices in the long term.
Great, thank you. Before I ask what will be our last question, did anybody else want to answer that one in terms of how we think about both immediate relief and systemic change?
I think that I just want to reinforce everything that everyone's saying and sort of project it through the lens of what day it is today. I failed in mentioning that today is May Day, May 1st, International Workers' Day. And I think that for us to conjure this energy, which is what I would like to verbalize right now, I want to call into this room, into all the rooms that everyone is in right now, the spirits of everyone who has come before us, the knowledge that people have worked and died, picked up arms and fought, and worked on the shop floors and out of them by picketing to get us the 8-hour workday and to get us the rights that we have right now. Knowing that we come from this long form history of not just worker struggle, the red side of May Day, but also the green side too, knowing that there is this long form indigenous pagan tradition of communities coming together and taking care of each other. I think digging into this history as communities is also a critical aspect of this as well. Knowing our history, sharing these stories with each other. I love what we're doing right now by way of hearing each other's stories, because this is a part of that legacy. We need to keep that fire lit. So when it comes for systemic change, we have to recognize that systemic change doesn't come about because compassionate lawmakers and politicians are giving us our rights. It's because working class people and undocumented people, indigenous people, women and non-men have been fighting for hundreds of years with their lives and continue to do this today for these rights. So plugging into these movements, the Poor People's Campaign, Cosecha, these large form movements is very important, I think, in understanding that it comes from a long form history and not forgetting that.
Thank you. So I was going to ask a question and just have everyone kind of answer in their closing remarks. Although I have a specific question maybe for some folks, because I want to get as many of these questions asked. So the kind of question, the kind of base question for everyone is, do you have strategies or suggestions for working across geographic or other divides as we think about how we're building our movements as we move forward? Who would like to close us out first? Go ahead, Anne.
So one of the things that I really like to see is cross labor organizings. So, you know, at the University of Michigan, we're trying to get all of the unions working together to bargain with our employer, GEO, LEO, the trades, AFSCME. But I also want to see unions work together outside of that institution. But I also would like to see more unions start to include just workers who are not necessarily formally organized in a union, but are organizing and fighting their employer, so that we welcome in all workers to learn, and especially some of the ones that are unorganized and doing wildcat strikes and doing some crazy organizing through this COVID-19 pandemic, have things to teach us. And so, you know, I think all workers together can win. And I would like to see all the unions and all organized and unorganized workers together, working together to win for everybody. Because when we fight, we win.
Özge?
Yeah, so one of the things we've seen when we were organizing as tenants was the division. Like, we had lots of divisions, like the unemployed and the employed, like different buildings who are renting from the same company and things like that. So we had to have lots of conversations, and we still didn't resolve all of the issues that we had, but those conversations are important to have, and those differences in divisions are important to acknowledge, because when it comes to, you know, once we send the letter to the collective letter to the landlord, we're almost sure that the landlord is going to try to, you know, offer things for the people who they find probably weaker, like, you know, maybe they're going to offer special payment plans, or they're going to offer, you know, fixing things in their units for the employed people so that they don't withhold in solidarity with the unemployed people. So it's important to recognize and acknowledge all these differences and start having these conversations in your respective, you know, organizing units early on, and decide what your bottom lines are. And, you know, kind of have people pledge for, you know, for whatever the bottom line is, and until the finish line.
Thank you for that. I mean, I just kind of just like lift up, because something I know I've heard is people have been talking about rent strikes. It's so important actually to be organized with people who do have the ability to pay rent as well, because people who don't have the ability to pay rent, it's not that, you know, like they just don't have an option, right? And so that part of that power is actually having people who do have the ability to also say that they will be withholding if there aren't these other protections for members in their building or within the company, depending on how big the organizing gets, so that they know that they're losing something that they couldn't get, that they could get otherwise. So I think that's an important piece of that. Lara, any last words thinking about how we reach across divides and how you think about how Cosecha is working across Ann Arbor and the Ypsilanti divide?
¿Te traducieron la pregunta, Laura, o quieres que te la traduzca? Te la traduza.
Ajá.
¿Sí oíste la pregunta en español o no?
No, no escuché. No, no la leí.
¿Cómo piensas que el movimiento Cosecha en Arbor y Ypsilanti va a colaborar con la división que existe en Ann Arbor y Ypsilanti?
Trabajando duro, invitando a la gente a que se siga uniendo. Y todo es trabajo, aprender de ese mismo trabajo y seguir luchando para que la gente se eduque. Y así es como seguiremos trabajando. Más que nada, antes que todo, es educar a la gente para que la gente entienda qué es lo que queremos.
One thing that the Movimiento Cosecha en Arbor Ypsilanti has been doing is the escuelitas, which we are teaching our members. We're talking about immigration, we're talking about who we are, where we are, so that we stand and we understand where we're coming from to begin with understanding immigration. So she says that through education is how we're going to be able to incorporate, I guess, both Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. So work
Yo veo
and more
que
work.
la gente se está educando porque la organización de la caravana hoy fue con educación.
Right. She sees that and it is working because the caravan today was a very simple way of showing how more educated or trained people are to make this kind of movements. We didn't only plan it like that. We planned it through following directions on how to do it right, making videos to tell people how to be safe, to make sure that they follow the traffic instructions, to wear a mask, for everybody to wear their gloves, for everybody to make the social distance. So she sees already with this, after this caravan, the difference of an organized organization that's educating and training the members.
Sí, yo he visto que tan solo en unos meses ha crecido el movimiento. Gracias a miles de aliados, de miembros de la comunidad inmigrante que se han unido, y no solo aquí, en varios lugares de Michigan. Entonces, esto está creciendo y vamos con todo.
She's seen in the last few months, even before COVID, how this group has grown. Many members, not only from the undocumented community, but immigrants and allies are joining. And this is turning to be a big group. In Michigan, it's not only in Arbor, Ypsilanti, we have many other circles, and also around, I think, 7 other states.
Gracias.
Thank you. Payton, do you have a 1-minute response to how we organize against working across geographic and or other divides? I think you talked a little bit about this already, maybe, but if you had any closing thoughts you wanted to share.
Yeah, this is the last question. Okay. Then I will try to pack in as much as I can into 1 minute. I would say that I've also been looking at some of the questions in the bar, and one of them that I think is related to this is the question of what do we do in response to fascist organizing? We've seen all of these state and House of Representative buildings and Capitol buildings being seized by armed fascist militias all across the state. They're trying to fold themselves into, you know, the disgruntled right, the conservative Trump supporters, but they are dangerous, not just because they're carrying guns, but because they have patriarchal and white supremacist mentalities, and they're organizing for building white supremacist power. So when we're thinking about organizing across geography and across platform and across, you know, trades, as Anne was talking about earlier, I think we have to also at the same time talk very seriously about how it is that we defend our spaces from these interjections of fascist, white supremacist, and patriarchal tendencies. So one of the most important things that we have to do is find those movements that are happening all across the world, from Chiapas territory and Zapatista territory in southern Mexico, and in northern Syria, where the comrades in the Kurdish communes are building new feminist-inspired, ecologically revolutionary societies. I think that we have to really think about these large-scale organizing efforts and understand how things are happening in our homes. Take stock, as Özge was saying earlier, of what is happening around us, and not trying to reciprocate or like reinvent things that are already happening. Who is doing the work that you want to do in your community? Help them out rather than trying to start a new thing. And all the while, as we're doing this work, by complementing each other instead of talking over each other or walking over each other, and doing the same thing that other groups are doing. And that doesn't mean that like we can't do what the large nonprofits are doing. Once again, the many is passing on a lot of supplies into the community as food gatherers is too. But we're doing it in a way that's directly democratic and controlled by the community, and not on behalf of some large white affluent board of directors. So thinking about how it is that as a community we come together along these lines of cooperation, and not allowing white supremacist, patriarchal, or otherwise capitalist or fascist tendencies to enter those movements through, like our comrades have all been talking about, popular education, integrating this like conversational style, this education style into our movement organizing, so we don't let these things grow, these fascist tendencies to grow in our movements, is I think very worthwhile to consider when we're talking about widespread organizing, because there's a lot of people that are actively trying to do harm in our communities right now, and we need to know and discern how we interpret what intentional harm is versus all of us that are trying to outgrow these old systems that we're growing out of right now. So I think that we have to have grace, but we also have to be militant and defend our territory at the same time.
Great. Thank you for all of that. It's been a pleasure meeting our panelists I didn't know before, and spending time with the ones I did know before. And thank you for all of you for joining us for our first town hall conversation. And I know we just want to show a slide for folks so they know how to get plugged in further. If you have not connected with us before, or if you would like to connect with us more deeply, you can go to the website that you see on the screen, Huron Valley COVID-19.wixsite.com/demands. And you can sign on to the petition and join our mailing list and get updates as we go along. And we plan to host multiple town halls moving forward. So we hope that you look for those as well. If we could just do a round of applause for all of our speakers, then that would be great. So thank you all and have a good night.
Happy May Day, everyone.
A todos los panelistas. Happy May
Happy
Day.
May Day.
Happy May
Feliz Día del
1st.
Trabajador.
May Day,
Yay.
yes.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.